Welcome to Right versus Left News, your daily briefing on the stories that matter, told from both sides of the aisle. I'm your AI host, Chris, and each day I bring you the most important political and cultural news, with perspectives from conservative and progressive voices. No spin, no agenda, just the facts and the opinions that shape our national conversation. Let's dive in. Here's a quick look at what's moving today. First, the Justice Department's landmark antitrust case against Live Nation and Ticketmaster finally hits the courtroom, with big implications for concerts, ticket fees, and competition. Second, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem faced a bruising Senate oversight hearing yesterday and heads to the House Judiciary Committee today as controversies over immigration enforcement and Department of Homeland Security funding boil over. Third, China's annual two sessions opened in Beijing, signaling a possible trim to its growth target and a pivot toward consumer spending, moves with global economic ripples. Fourth, the fight over Federal Reserve independence is deepening as new analysis lands and legal skirmishes continue over subpoenas tied to Chair Jerome Powell. Fifth, a cluster of cyber policy developments, an FTC workshop for small businesses on scams and cybersecurity, schedule changes to critical infrastructure outreach because of a DHS funding lapse, and an FCC reset of an advisory council to tackle network security. Reporting from AP, The Wall Street Journal, PBS, and international outlets points to these as the big threads to watch. Before we jump into today's stories, a quick word from our sponsors.
This episode is brought to you by Family GPT, the AI chat platform actually designed for kids. If your children are curious about ChatGPT, but you're worried about what they might see, Family GPT gives you full parental controls, content filtering, and the ability to align responses with your family's values. Whether Christian, Muslim, Jewish, secular, and many more. Monitor every conversation, set usage limits, and let your kids explore AI safely. No ads, no data selling, complete privacy. Sign up free at familygpt.chat.
Thanks to our sponsors for supporting Right versus Left News. Now, let's get to the headlines. Now, Live Nation and Ticketmaster. The Justice Department's antitrust trial opened in federal court in Manhattan. Prosecutors say Live Nation dominates concert promotion and ticketing, driving up prices and squeezing rivals, a backlash that intensified after the Taylor Swift ticket fiasco. Live Nation denies monopoly power and blames high prices on scalpers and artist-driven pricing. The trial could run about 6 weeks. If the government prevails, remedies could be structural, even a breakup. On the right, commentators often caution courts against breakups unless clear market abuse is proven, warning that heavy-handed remedies can backfire if exclusive contracts are standard in a competitive market, and if bots and scalpers are the bigger problem. On the left, progressives point to years of consolidation and consumer frustration, fees, opaque pricing, limited venue choice, as evidence the market isn't truly competitive. They want the Justice Department to rein in dominant platforms and open space for artists, venues, and alternative ticket services, even if that means unwinding a merger. Immigration and oversight on Capitol Hill. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee yesterday and faces a House Judiciary Oversight hearing today at 10 a.m. Eastern. Senators pressed her on DHS spending, aggressive immigration operations, and her comments about 2 Minnesotans killed during an enforcement incident. Coverage highlights bipartisan criticism of a high-dollar DHS ad campaign and questions about accuracy and oversight. The House panel lists her as the sole witness this morning. On the right, many argue aggressive enforcement is overdue and that DHS must project deterrence to reduce unlawful crossings, with some Republicans still scrutinizing spending and messaging. Border security remains the underlying priority. On the left, progressives focus on civil liberties, due process, and transparency, arguing DHS operations have swept too broadly and that rhetoric around domestic terrorism is inflammatory and unsupported. They emphasize concerns about wrongful arrests, conditions for detainees, and whether DHS leadership is politicizing enforcement. Now to Beijing. China opened its annual 2 sessions, the meetings where leaders lay out the economic game plan and 5-year priorities. Reporting points to a likely GDP target between 4.5% and 5%, plus proposals to bolster consumer demand, address the birth rate slump, and push tech self-reliance. A continuing military purge underscores Xi Jinping's emphasis on loyalty, while the property downturn and weak household sentiment loom in the background. On the right, Business-friendly voices see confirmation that China's growth model is slowing and argue US policy should double down on supply chain diversification, selective decoupling, and tech controls. Caution, not stimulus at all costs. On the left, many emphasize global stability and climate-aligned cooperation, warning that hardline trade conflict can raise prices at home. Social policy ideas like consumption vouchers or overtime curbs are viewed as steps toward a more balanced model, even as doubts remain about transparency and labor protections. We'll be right back with more of today's news after this brief message.
This episode is brought to you by Family GPT, the AI chat platform actually designed for kids. If your children are curious about ChatGPT, but you're worried about what they might see, Family GPT gives you full parental controls, content filtering, and the ability to align responses with your family's values. Whether Christian, Muslim, Jewish, secular, and many more. Monitor every conversation, set usage limits, and let your kids explore AI safely. No ads, no data selling, complete privacy. Sign up free at familygpt.chat.
Thanks again to our sponsors. Now back to the news. The Federal Reserve. The fight over Fed independence sharpened again. The Wall Street Journal argues that Jerome Powell's unusual public pushback to a Justice Department criminal probe, tied to testimony on a Fed building renovation, rallied bipartisan support, but may not shield the institution if political pressure continues, especially with Kevin Warsh nominated to succeed Powell when his term ends in May. Prior reporting detailed the Fed's court effort to quash subpoenas. On the right, two threads stand out: populists frustrated with high rates who favor closer political scrutiny of the Fed, and institutional conservatives warning that criminalizing policy disputes risks long-term damage to markets. Credibility and independence are framed as essential to price stability. On the left, many argue the probe looks like executive overreach designed to bend monetary policy to political needs. There's bipartisan unease with the subpoenas, and progressives call for insulating central banking from partisan fights, even slowing any confirmation of a successor until the investigation ends. And finally, cyber policy, a quieter but important turn. The Federal Trade Commission is hosting a workshop on protecting small businesses from scammers and cybersecurity risks. A partial DHS funding lapse has forced some cyber outreach events to be rescheduled, and the Federal Communications Commission is rechartering its CSRIC Advisory Council to focus on threats from SIM farms to submarine cable security, with nominations due March 11th. On the right, many favor sharing threat intelligence while keeping compliance frameworks flexible, guidance voluntary, prosecution tough on criminals, and red tape minimal, especially while DHS operations are constrained by funding fights. On the left, progressives push for stronger baseline standards to protect workers, consumers, and critical infrastructure. They argue coordinated federal action, grants, and clear rules can level the playing field so small firms aren't outgunned by sophisticated scams and nation-state threats. Quick recap: a high-stakes Live Nation antitrust clash, DHS oversight fireworks moving from Senate to House, China's signal sending at the two sessions, a renewed debate over the Fed's independence, and an under-the-radar cyber policy day that still matters for small businesses. We'll keep tracking outcomes from today's hearings and meetings, the China readouts, and any early courtroom signals in the Ticketmaster case. That's it for today's episode of Right versus Left News. Remember, understanding both sides isn't about picking a team, it's about being informed. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and join us tomorrow for another balanced look at the day's biggest stories. Until next time, stay curious and stay informed.